like we've already walked 6,000 miles. We've walked more than 6,000 miles, and we have like less than 200 miles left. If I died in that 200 miles, like it would just be like that's a worthwhile place to die compared to just like crossing the street in Philadelphia and get run over by a car.
Are you going to take that risk?
I don't have a choice at this point.
The choice of what?
To go to Punta Gallinas or not. To encounter dangers there or to wait for you to come back here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going with.
Camera 1 rolling, camera 2 rolling. August 22nd, 2020. How did this idea come to fruition?
It's kind of been a long project in the making. So to really start at the beginning for me would be Dan and I actually met running cross country in high school. Dan was a senior, I was a freshman. He was kind of a leader on the team. And we kind of forged that friendship running all of these miles and logging all of this work.
Justin and I were a part of this cross country and track program in high school that was trying to be the best team in the state. We were trying to be one of the best teams in the country. We were running 80, 90, even 100-mile weeks all year round in the elements, rain, snow, wind, you name it. We were out in it.
That kind of slog just day in and day out made me appreciate kind of like the benefits of doing something like that. When he graduated and went on to college, like he was one of the guys from that class that I stayed in really, really close touch with and was like a good friend of mine. I always tried to recreate kind of like that camaraderie, that experience, and that took me through the Army. And from the Army, I started traveling when I got out. And I had done this trip in Spain called the Camino de Santiago, and that had taken me across France and Spain, and I met some amazing friends over there. One of my friends that I had met on that trip, she was asking me like, if you could do anything, like anything in the world, what would you do? And I was like, I think I would walk across South America because it's this amalgamation of all of these things that I've been working on, like my writing and learning Spanish and my love of South America and these walks and this military experience. In answering her question, I was like, I think that's what I want to do. And I remember I was living with Dan at the time, and I was like walking through the kitchen one day and I was just like, you want to walk across South America, Dan? And it was, to me it was serious, but I knew that he was going to say no. Like it was just, no one was ever going to say yes.
He asked me and I was like, yeah, if I can make a documentary about it.
All right, we're going to Punta Arena.
He would try and warn me that this wasn't some little getaway or that it would be easy.
It's going to take a year. It's like minimum. It's like 6,000 miles, hopefully, and no more. Hopefully no more. The goal was to start at the southernmost point of the continent and walk to the northernmost point of the continent, walking every single step of the way.
Dan and I were together for 4 years, so it was like, whatever you're doing, I'm doing.
The funny thing was, I had committed to this trip, but I wasn't prepared for it at all.
He didn't even own a backpack, or a tent, or a water bottle. He had his camera, and that was it.
I'm not enjoying this.
We're staying warm.
No, we're not.
We're staying warm.
We had 7 months to prepare, so we put away every penny that we earned. It's a lot less cool when that's all you have for a year. Gathered all the gear that we would need, said our goodbyes.
May y'all trip be prosperous, enjoyable, and very unlikely.
And when we set off, we had no idea when we would be coming home. Reaching the starting point was an adventure in its own right. We ended up taking a bus until the road ended. And then we had a challenging 2.5-day hike just to reach the southernmost point of the continent.
We fucking started.
How's it feel to finally begin the journey?
The reality of what we are up against now is kind of setting in. You kind of like downplay how like serious it is, and now we have to do it.
Thing that we've been anticipating and dreading and like worrying over, and doing all of the logistical, not fun aspects of, we finally get to like get out there and prove ourselves.
Those first few steps away from the bus, we were in a picturesque landscape at the end of the world, but it was also extremely intimidating. Everything felt very special about this entire place. The sounds, the colors, the temperatures, it all felt appropriate that this is where we would be starting our trip.
The beauty is incredible. It's almost like out of a fairy tale. You know, it finally feels like an actual adventure in the most storybook kind of way.
Like, it was just challenging in all of the most amazing ways, like mentally, physically, like as a group, like getting along. The pure like obstacles and like terrain. Like the second you start getting frustrated, like you just look up and you're literally like in the most beautiful place like I've ever been. Like constantly.
You know, we're just trying to get to the point where the GPS says that you can't go any further south. You're there.
It was just this place that had, you know, cliff walls on one side and an incoming tide on the other. Ready? Cabo Froward.
Cabo Froward.
This is the hardest starting line that I've ever gotten to.
Thing that was like probably the hardest thing I've ever done. You gotta keep on doing it.
We fucking made it. And it's incredible. Take a couple pictures and then just acknowledge the fact that the very next step we would take would be the first on what would end up being the most ambitious trip of our lives.
We were roughly 7,000 miles away from Punta Gallinas, Colombia, which was our ultimate endpoint.
You're just full of like energy and excitement, and you just want to like have at the whole thing all at once. And that feeling goes away very quickly once you kind of sober up to the reality of the undertaking.
What did you say?
I hate this shit.
What do you hate?
The rocks. I had never like experienced this where you start to get comfortable with pain that way. When you're in your rhythm, it hurts, but you can keep going. But the second you stop, it gets dangerous.
It's the worst starting back up.
Like my feet would hurt so bad the second we stopped. Like if we had to go more, like I kind of felt like crying.
You're quickly realizing that you're in the elements, that your pack gets very heavy very quickly, that your feet are gonna hurt in a different way.
Like the reality set in. It starts out fun and you're fooling around, and then it gets dark and you're like, oh, like we need to eat, like we need to sleep, like we need to set up camp, like where are we? What is the weather like? What is the ground like? Like all these things start to become reality.
And I didn't realize how challenging it would be for you guys, like how much goes into it, like every single day.
Progress was the source.
As far as like puddles go, it's pretty clean. It was like clearish.
Just assumed it'd be like really carefree and fun. Yeah, like we're going on a hike, like we're gonna walk every day and like go see all these beautiful things. Like it's not a vacation for you guys, you know what I mean?
Walking was the mode that Justin had come up with.
So after I got out of the military, I decided to hike the Appalachian Trail. And I thought, I'm a tough Army guy, I can do it, it'll be easy, and it kicked my ass. But it was also an infectious experience. I found that in the moments when you really kind of pushed yourself to that limit, there was almost kind of a euphoric kind of bliss that could be found. And it was a lot of, self-actualization, learning about yourself, learning about your weaknesses, your strengths, and kind of just learning about who you are.
Justin had had some experience doing some of the stuff, but this was the first time that Laura and I had ever gotten ourselves into something like this.
Dan was up for anything, and he would say yes to anything, but like our adventures still weren't anything close to this. Like people who usually do something like this, like are outdoorsy people,
When Justin walked the Camino de Santiago, we went and visited him.
Dan and Lauren came and met me for the last 2 weeks of that trip or something, and that was like his first taste of walking, and that was the end of my trip, and we had a really good time. That goes to show that we were already really close.
So when he gave me this idea to go hike South America, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm in. For some reason, I just said, yeah, I'm in. I didn't think about anything else. That's the reason that Lauren came with us on the trip.
The three of us have spent a lot of time together and just kind of enjoyed each other's company.
Justin, careful. Careful.
It's not what it looks like.
It's exactly what it looks like.
So in terms of personalities, it was actually pretty smooth to have her along.
Cut me off?
Lauren and I had been dating for nearly 4 years at that point.
It's kind of at the point where we were talking about getting married.
It was during the planning stages of this trip that we came to the reality that Lauren wasn't going to be able to join us for the entire journey. We were unable to come up with a solution to lessen our time apart, so we ultimately came to the decision to break up once she left the walk. It just seemed too selfish to stay together, especially since we had no idea how long the walk would take.
And for him just to not have the mindset that he has someone to come home to. If you eliminate that, then you have to be involved in what you're doing there. But then it was also when I walk away, this is the last time I get to see this person the way we have been for 4 years. So it's I think a little bit of hanging on to that. When I got on the bus and left, at that point it was whatever Dan and I's relationship was is not like that anymore.
I thought by trying to control the decision-making process, that was gonna make everything a lot easier, but that just wasn't the case. I had just lost my last connection to home and my old life, and I wasn't prepared for what that was gonna feel like.
You're always gonna try and hold on to what you left behind. That experience drags you in kicking and screaming. You can't be a tourist to this experience. It's too big. It's too dangerous. It's too extreme in magnitude that you will break if you don't fully embrace your new reality.
That new reality placed us in front of some of the strongest winds in the world. They were so strong that they could literally stop you from walking forward. It almost seemed as if they were testing me to say, do you really, really want to be here? And to be honest, I was feeling beaten down and a little lost.
And you could see it, I think, in the walk where the miles became harder for him. And it wasn't because of the physicality of the walk. It was because just the emotional energy expended on each day, thinking about these things, going through these memories, going through these kind of what ifs, they take up more energy and tire you out more than any of the physical miles ever could.
My mentality as a runner was always to tough it out, grit your teeth, duck your head, and go. But that tool is not necessarily applicable to all situations. Everything that he had learned on his previous hikes and his previous experiences had all lent themselves to him being ready for this.
For me, I think my threshold moment was when I joined the military, and you feel like you've just walked away from everything that you ever knew, and now you're just out in this strange world, and you don't get to carry the things that you had with you, the things that made you feel secure. For the first year, maybe, that I was in the military, it was really hard for me to learn how to just let go of where I was coming from and accept where I was and make the most of that.
That change in focus allowed me to start pursuing the trip in a different way. It allowed me to start embracing the suck that comes along with it, but also moving forward with it and letting it make you stronger.
Almost in a sink or swim kind of way, he's got to swim now. And so when she left, it was kind of like this threshold that we both crossed together. And it was almost symbolic because I knew now Dan's on this trip all the way because he doesn't have anything else. He's here with me, and we're gonna step into the unknown together.
So brother, keep going.
I will.
Taking care of us. I love you.
I love the idea of it.
When we were talking about whether or not Dan speaks Spanish, she looked at what I was trying to say and she goes, poco nada, poco nada.
Poco nada.
Esa cholita traidora.
Patagonia was, in my opinion, the best place to start the entire trip because it felt like an adventure down there. It felt challenging. I felt like every day that I was looking around, I was just in some sort of painting that somebody had created. I didn't realize at the time just how lucky I was to be able to go down there and experience it. In fact, Patagonia was so incredible and diverse that it felt wrong to ever put the camera away. But the problem with that is that there is only so much mental and physical energy to divide up into each day.
He was basically trying to have two different journeys and marry them together, which is incredibly difficult.
Anytime I brought the camera out, it pulled me away from being present on the walk or with the people that we were meeting along the way. And I never wanted people to feel uncomfortable when I had the camera on, and I never wanted to slow down the progress that we were making while walking. So deciding when to bring the camera out was always a delicate balancing act. I've been producing shots and stuff that will be bland and surface and won't actually make a good documentary. It'll make a documentary, but it's not gonna be good enough. Not for what the amount of time and effort and even money that's going into this. Justin and I discussed it, and we decided that if there were opportunities to leave the hike and go shoot certain things or save a little bit of energy and shoot something better, that I would go ahead and do that. I'm still hiking like 95% of the time. So we're both just falling into our natural reasons that we're down here. One day, Justin was about ready to walk ahead to one of the next towns, and I was at a bus station ready to head to the next town to meet him there. I had set the bags down for a few seconds to check the name for a bus that was coming in, and when I turned around to see the bags, this little drawstring bag that we kept our laptop, our camera, and our backup hard drive in had been snagged. I literally turned away for a few seconds. When I turned around, it was gone. So when he rolls into our meeting point, I'm just sitting there and he rolls in and I go, dude, the fucking bags got stolen. Like this movie is just kind of like hanging on by a thread right now. And it just started to feel like all this stuff that I had been working for and that I'd given up to come down here, it was in jeopardy, which sucks. Previously, I had decided to not walk every step. So now both goals are completely removed from me. And the movie to me was always, when things get hard, you're still doing something you love. And now that's gone. We weren't on a North Face or National Geographic team with endless resources. We were just two dudes who gave up everything in their lives to go after a lofty goal that they had set for themselves. And because of that, we didn't have the funds to replace our camera gear. What ultimately helped my decision to stay was that a friend of mine had sent me a smartphone to use as a backup camera when it didn't feel appropriate to have the bigger camera out. Even though it wasn't how I envisioned shooting this documentary, it gave me a renewed sense of purpose, and it gave me a major boost of energy to carry on, which came at a critical time because the next section of the trip that we were going to be covering was the Atacama Desert. There was always this kind of big question mark over an 800-mile section of the trip.
It was big. The Atacama Desert is the driest place on Earth. One of the driest, like most austere, inhospitable places on the planet. Water is probably the heaviest thing that you will carry. We absolutely had to have an airtight plan to make sure that we had water.
What we ended up deciding on was to get a little hand truck and to load up all of our food and water on that and just walk along the side of the road with this little hand truck.
We went to this hardware store in town before we got to the desert. I was trying to explain to the guy in Spanish what I needed this cart for. We're testing different wheels and we were taking it for walks around the hardware store.
What we would do each day is Justin would generally walk the hand cart first half of the walk that day, and then we would take a break, and then that second half of the walk, I would then take over and push it until we reached our endpoint that day.
The sun's UV during the day is so bad that it threatens sun poisoning, so we're trying to do as much walking outside of the sun as we can, which is difficult in the desert.
So we came up with this plan to wake up around 4, get on the road between 4:30 and 5 in the morning, walk roughly 20-ish miles till the sun started coming up, and then we would set up camp, sleep as much as we could, have a snack, and then hike another 5 to 7 miles at night, and then set up camp again, finish eating our dinner, and go back to sleep. But it was crazy.
If you think seeing a shooting star is a rare occurrence, you are wrong. I mean, you just see tons of them.
Like every minute.
Like every night. It's just such a like a mystical experience. And that wasn't the most intense experience of the desert. It was just one in this long list.
One of the things that made that section so memorable to me was that it was so vast and so inspiring in a way that I found myself face to face with myself in a way that I had never really experienced before.
That's the magic of the desert, is like you can go crazy out here, not because it's so fucking hot during the day or cold at night, or it's so dry. You're gonna go crazy because all you have to look at is your own mind. That is, whatever magic you're carrying inside of yourself is the magic that the desert is going to present to you.
There's just like this absurd cultural significance to the Atacama. I mean, from like the petroglyphs, Chacabuco, which was a literal concentration camp for political prisoners during the Pinochet regime. You combine the ancient history and the 20th century history and the modern like mining history with the truckers and like the celestial significance and just like vastness of this desert sky is just like so expansive and so beautiful and yet so eerie. It was when the trip was like most alive, but to be out there day in, day out, always worried about water, always worried about, survival and escaping the heat, escaping the sun, and to just know all of the history there. I mean, it was a perfect storm.
One night, I noticed that the car starts wobbling a little bit. Realized that like the entire side, it was starting to like separate on the wheel. It's done.
Well, that's it for the sand crawler. Fucking thing blew out a tire. The whole entire side's like ripped open.
And meanwhile, the only human beings that are out there are astronomers, miners of sodium nitrate, or the truckers that like just run up and down that one highway day in and day out. And we ended up making friends with these truckers. We would see the same guys running their routes like every time.
When our cart that we got across the desert with broke down, they were how I got from the previous camp to the meetup point the next day. Without them, well, I don't think we would have gotten through the desert the way we wanted to. Throughout the entire nearly 800-mile section of the desert, we were given food, water, just a quick conversation here and there. We were road dogs together. It was kind of cool. We had a community, despite the fact that a lot of times they wouldn't even stop. Sometimes they would just throw stuff out at Justin. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen.
The truckers have come through in amazing fashion. A guy just threw a bologna sandwich out the window without even stopping. These guys have been taking care of us this whole time.
¿Todo bien? Sí, todo bien.
I fucking love these truckers. Sometimes these guys want to stop and talk and figure out what we're doing. Sometimes guys just pull over on the side of the road because they see someone walking and they don't even care or know about the trip. They literally just see a guy and think, that guy could use some fruit. This guy just gave us some fruit. Never seen him before in my life. After 3,000 and something like 300 miles of walking from damn near Antarctica, I have just passed through customs and am officially out of Chile.
With roughly half the walk behind us, we needed to start thinking about what it would take for us to get home.
Every single decision we made on this trip was always going to have money lurking behind it. 9 times out of 10, we made every decision on what is the fastest way. Part of that is because that's who we are and we're always racing, we're always competing. And a major part of that is it's a simple calculation. Less days equal less money. On a trip like this, you hope that it would be a little more romantic, a little more whimsical, but it really was always nuts and bolts. It was counting calories, it was counting miles, it was counting dollars.
We started playing around with some of the numbers to see what it would take to get home by Thanksgiving, which means that we would cover roughly 3,500 miles in about 6 months. It was just too good of a story to pass up. So with little room for error, we actually bought our tickets home. All this excitement was only delaying the realization of just how much of a toll this trip was starting to take on us. The decision to actually set an end date started a series of decisions that would have a major impact on the team and the walk. The first of which was when I agreed to take the bags for several weeks to give us a head start to reach our endpoint on time. The fastest route now was an absolute must. And that route was going to present us with new types of challenges. The route that we were on was actually pretty mentally exhausting because we were going through a pretty heavily industrialized area. For the most part, it's gray and overcast almost all the time. And you'd be surprised how much that begins to affect your mood.
The walk, the miles, the weather, the towns that don't have Wi-Fi, that don't have showers, that don't have any of the comforts that you're used to, they become antagonizing features.
I can't fucking think with the TV and this fucking radio going at the same time.
You know what I mean? Like we spent the night in some horrifying places.
I'm not very picky about where we sleep, but this is easily the grossest place we've been in. Camp meals were no longer a nice distraction after long miles. We've been eating them for 7, 8, 9 months.
It stopped being fun and novel.
It was one of the most uncomfortable hitchhikes I've ever had. The guy kept asking me if he could buy my phone. He kept trying to get my phone from me. I've never wanted cell service so badly as I do right now. It's midnight and Justin hasn't showed up to camp yet.
Happy to see you. Yeah, I was worried about you. All of these things kind of start to become a domino effect where every little thing is stacking upon itself to make things a lot more difficult. We were actually being told on a pretty regular basis that we were gonna get robbed or assaulted. It was getting so bad to the point where I wasn't even setting up camp when we got up to our meeting point until it was dark out.
I'm just gonna chill out by the road for now, not unpack anything, and wait till it gets darker out and then set it up.
And then you start to realize just how important people are when you start to lose them.
There were long stretches when we just weren't connecting with people. And it's no coincidence that those were some of the hardest times on the trip, some of the most stressed between Dan and I.
Nothing seemed to be going our way anymore. Tensions continued to build, and they continued to build even further every time we delayed when I would start walking again. And those delays just raised the question for me of what's my purpose here anymore?
When you feel like you're wasting time and that you don't have like a strong purpose, like hours become days, days become weeks. Like it's like 3.5 months is a long fucking time to feel like you don't have a purpose. But
in trying to make a movie, you're trying to balance out attitudes and egos at the time. The more I lost meaning or purpose in the trip, the more I was becoming like abrasive to him.
I mean, we talked about him leaving because he was kind of unfulfilled on this trip, especially after he stopped walking. And there were moments where I was like, yeah, like, just go.
Nobody wants to see a movie of me grabbing a bus or a hitchhike every day, you walking 25, 30 miles and then coming back quite miserable.
Right.
Like, nobody wants to see that. These walks are exhausting. They also make being friends sometimes difficult because it just puts you in a bad mood. And you take that bad mood out on one another often.
No, you put the fucking camera on me because I was saying that my boots were breaking down.
We really did have some breakdowns in the team to where we just couldn't stand the sight of each other, basically.
The second half of the trip, it got ugly.
I'm so fucking over this thing.
It was always inevitable that we were going to fight and that we were going to kind of like struggle through the relationship aspect of it. It's easy to just point to, oh, well, you guys are around each other all the time. There's proximity. You're sharing a tent, you know, like you get on each other's nerves. Like that's the easy stuff.
We had this big, fucking huge, long, drawn out fight. A lot of raw emotions came out, and that's always really uncomfortable.
It's not just this objective of getting to the end. You also have, you know, you're fighting with one of your closest friends, and that doesn't feel good.
I don't think it would be fair or even honest to kind of share specifics on that topic that could only serve to insult the other person in front of the camera, because we, at least better than anyone else could, we understand what the other went through down there and what we ourselves went through down there.
I think the only real saving grace in a lot of ways for us was that we would genuinely wake up every morning and we would try and be the best version of ourselves and let every day be a new day. And as cliche as that sounds, it was always the reason to stay, and it was always the reason to stay friends with Justin. Even with all these obstacles that came with the trip at the time, Justin was steadfast in his motivation to finish the trip. Ever since this trip's conception, he knew exactly what he was going after. No one was telling Justin that he had to finish this walk. He could have very easily said, you know what, we're not having any fun anymore. The friendship is being strained. We're not getting the same kind of rewards that we got in earlier parts of the trip. So let's just go home. But he didn't. And to me, that was a very big reminder that you don't get to do unique, ambitious things in life if you're not willing to put in the work. Nothing was stopping or getting in Justin's way.
Okay, well, I just balanced my way across it, and that was fairly terrifying, and I was really off balance, so I didn't get any footage, but I made it, and so didn't have to backtrack a few miles, so that's lucky. We've walked about 5,000 something miles in 53 degrees of latitude, but we're about to cross the equator, and all of a sudden I'm on the northern hemisphere, so that's pretty exciting.
With Justin walking and me carrying the bags, we were covering ground extremely fast. Having walked so little up to this point in the second half of the trip, the idea of walking just seemed a lot less attractive. And the walk was never my ultimate goal for being down there anyways. So we both decided that I would play the support role until we reached Barranquilla, and then I would walk the final leg of the journey with them. We get him to Barranquilla today. That means we have about 300 miles left on this entire trip. It's about 2 weeks of walking, and we're ready for it, that's for sure. Barranquilla was actually a pretty big milestone, not only because it meant that I would be able to start walking once we left there, but also because we were meeting up with a very special person. We were meeting up with our friend Kathy.
God, how are you?
Kathy was actually the first person that we met on our trip. We met Kathy on the plane ride down to South America, but we had been talking to her for over a year.
She not only invited us into her home, but fed us and gave us a place to sleep and a place to relax for a couple days while we ramped up for the final stages of our trip. We just left Barranquilla and we're making our way to Punta Gallinas. It's the final 2 weeks and I am excited. As we moved our way along the coast right by the Caribbean, this was going to be anything but a pleasant stroll into the final few steps of the trip.
When it comes time to actually just put the nail in the coffin and just be done with it, you may have walked 900 miles. Those next 50 might be the hardest you ever do.
Last days were some of the biggest challenges that we had faced in a very long time. In that area, we were dealing with a lot of mosquitoes and our tent zippers didn't close up anymore and it was too hot for us to lay next to each other. So we were exhausted. We weren't getting a lot of good sleep. Supposedly it's pretty dangerous. We've heard some horror stories about robberies, people getting stripped down and left in the desert naked, but it's the route we chose. At different times throughout the trip, we had dealt with fear. So when we reached Colombia, and especially this section of Colombia, it wasn't the first time that we were dealing with fear. Fear can take on different manifestations. Sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's location-based, and sometimes it's external in the forms of people.
We did our research before we left. We were always kind of following word of mouth. We had to learn to take even locals' advice with a grain of salt because it was so often proved to be incorrect.
So when more people are telling you that a certain area is going to be dangerous, it's pretty hard to compartmentalize that into where it belongs.
It just takes a toll on you because you don't know what to believe. It's the ghost stories that you're telling yourself every day. It absolutely took a toll on our trip.
So you're carrying a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress with you, and it's really starting to do a number on you.
You're scared to go to sleep at night. You're in the dark. You're defenseless in your tent.
We were suspicious of anyone that we saw. There weren't many vehicles out there, but when we did see one, we were hiding in bushes.
We went through this area anyways. What ended up happening? No one tried to hurt us. No one tried to rob us. But we were still scared. We still had a very scary final 2 weeks walking through this region.
And if that fear wasn't bad enough, the walk itself was physically draining. Carrying the weight of several days worth of water in the Caribbean sun, I was just pouring sweat, and I remember feeling like I was gonna drink all of my water.
In this moment, for me personally, and it was something that Dan and I had to have some very explicit talks about, was if there really is danger there that could be life-threatening, are we okay with it? And in that moment, in that calculation, it was, yeah. And Dan agreed. I would rather die trying to get to La Guajira than not take the risk.
And then all of a sudden, you can feel the air cooling a bit. And then you can start to hear the waves.
Very much. We just literally crossed the whole fucking country together. So, it's getting us through.
Yeah, man. I'm happy I could be a part of it. Appreciate that. It does mean a lot.
We did not go on this journey together. We had 7,000 miles and 15 months behind us. And those were 7,000 miles and 15 months of my own. And Dan had his own 7,000 miles and 15 months.
Nobody was there. Our families weren't there. Our friends weren't there. It was just us.
Let's get a picture real quick in front of them.
It felt right to kind of let go of what the trip was, let go of kind of the individual journey that we had been on, and say, okay, that's behind us, and now let's take our first steps towards what our next chapter is. And our next chapter is us going home together. Just as it was hard to adjust to being down there on this unconventional journey, you have to go through the same transition to adjust back to being home. Just as there's growing pains entering the walk, there's growing pains leaving it.
Now is the time where I'm starting to like realize like, oh, this thing is done. Like it's over. Focus on the movie and focus on like starting the new chapter of my life, which is like a weird thing to start up. Like you focus on something for so long and then just like that, it's over. So now I'm just like left saying like, what now?
Welcome to Philadelphia. Local time is 9:30.
You're trying to go back to a former version of yourself, but that version doesn't exist anymore. We were different people by the time we got to the end.
Are you back for good?
We're back for good.
Oh my God.
What the hell?
Yo.
It's a Thanksgiving miracle!
It's a Thanksgiving miracle!
What are you doing here?
And they don't know the journey that you've been on. They don't know the transformation that you've gone through.
There's this weird time gap that happens. I feel like I'm a different person now, and the person that I'm talking to isn't the person that I left them as. So home is not home the way it used to be.
After such a transformation, you're coming back into a world that you no longer know and no longer feel comfortable in. So if the first thing that you hear from them is like, oh, look at you, like you need to take a shower, you're just like, man, I thought it was gonna mean more.
I feel like Dan was going through a lot of things when he came back, and I feel like he was like upset or angry or trying to figure these things out, but he didn't put that on other people.
I'm pulling out $55 of the last $75 that I have to go get a phone number. I'm starting to feel like a little out of place.
This seemed like a path towards knowing ourselves better and finding a way to be our best selves. It's a really nice concept, but I learned that you can push it so far that it takes so much energy and so much time to heal afterwards that it may have left you worse than you started.
I had no idea how long it was going to take me to process this trip.
On both. This is Dan, take one. So Dan, where are we today?
Today we are back in our hometown, August of 2020, finally shooting our interviews nearly 3 years after we've completed the trip.
Why did it take so long to get here?
Originally I was hoping to come back and start editing the movie right away. But how could I tell a story when I didn't even know what that story was or what the trip was? It took a lot of processing afterwards to figure out what the trip meant to me, and it continues to evolve even to this day.
It's interesting in the ways that the trip is perceived by others and the way it's perceived by me or perceived by Dan, and even he and I have different ideas of it, I think.
We can relate on a lot of things, but even though we cover the same ground, we are different people that handle these things very differently. I now feel like I have tools that I've never had before. Just because this trip is over doesn't mean that I'm now content and can just sit back and relax and hang my head on that journey. I got to find new ways to push myself. And this trip really opened up a lot of ways that I can start to do that in my own life.
The trip ignited this fire, and like he's still like going with it. He's now making these trips happen and creating these experiences and bringing his camera along and like capturing these moments to like become the filmmaker or the person that he wants to be.
I feel at times impressed and proud of what Dan and I did on our trip. But do I endorse the trip? Probably not. The trip was so big that it turned into a megalomania of pursuing this one singular task. And I think that's been a difficult thing to shake. You know, you never would think that it would take that long to kind of like recenter back to the place that you spent your whole life.
Before this trip started, my imagination would run wild with the kind of footage that I would get, the kind of laughs that Justin and I would share, and the scenery that I would see, the challenges that we would come across. But what I could have never anticipated were the heartache that I would inevitably have to experience, the loss of purpose that I would feel when the camera was stolen, or just how much the friendship would have been pushed to its own brink.
The favorite question of just about everyone when we got home was like, are you guys even friends anymore? And I hated that question more than any other question that anyone could ask.
I think I was surprised at how pushed to my limits I was by the end, which made me concerned about their friendship at first, and then I realized it was just me going through everything.
As soon as like we got back and started to kind of like heal from the walk, so did the friendship.
And so even though I didn't like him at times on this trip, or I didn't like the way that he handled himself or our friendship, because as ugly as it got, I knew that we were just letting the trip reflect in us.
Dan had become something different than a friend.
I don't think you go through something like that and you don't become closer.
I now know that I can literally trust Dan with my life. When you know that someone has seen you so stripped down, so broken, it's almost like you can't be comfortable in the same room with that person because you know that they know that you have been weak. You've been seen for who you truly are. That is an incredible dynamic to have with another human being. He was true and faithful in the moments when it couldn't have been more important. And he never failed me in that way. And I wouldn't have made it without him. And that is as honest as I can speak about him. The friendship is still firm, and in some ways it's been really kind of cemented in a way that can't be taken away anymore.
It's easy to look back in hindsight and say that we could have made this better. We could have made a better documentary. We could have been better friends, better teammates down there walking. We could have chosen a different route. But ultimately, the goal was always for Justin to walk every single step of the way and for me to make a documentary about it. And anything else that happened in between was completely up to the way that the trip was gonna flow.
Justin's going to the bathroom, and all the cows are following him.
What up, my brother?
So my life is in his hands.
Yeah, like hobbits.
Yeah, exactly.
I just gave you that heart attack. See you, man.
tell you are thinking, fucking Keller has dragged me away from everything I love to do something that he himself hates.
Thanks for letting us be part of the movie, Kathy.
Yes. They did the Walking Back Army Star.
What's the name of the movie again?
Kathy and the Skywalkers.
Actually, it's his movie and he's using you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Finally, somebody understands.
Likewise, it's my walk and I'm using him. That we're joking, but that's actually completely true. Like
Because we don't care about each other.
Yeah.